In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of the holy, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in good times or in tempests, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. With these words by Howard Thurman, we begin. Welcome to the online worship of the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley for January 10, 2021, with our title today of Looking Forward. And we begin an exploration of this month's worship and covenant group theme of success and failure. After a profoundly difficult year of 2020, we were anxious to welcome a new year, a better year, and we still hope that may come. But sadly, tragically, the first week of the new year has been even more profoundly difficult. This morning, many of us within the United States and around the world are still reeling from witnessing violence at the steps and in the sacred halls of our nation's Capitol building. Mortified, heartbroken, shocked, and angry, we wonder how such a brutal assault to the very heart of American democracy could have taken place. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated its brutal attack with the highest numbers of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths that we have seen so far. Like the dawning of a new day, the calendar marking of a new year offers us the opportunity to start fresh and to separate the old from the new. And yet we are all bound in the history in which we have come and the history unfolding in this present moment. As Unitarian Universalist minister Kathleen McTeague writes, we stand at a threshold. The new year, something truly new, still unformed, leaving a stunning power in our hands. What shall we do with this great gift of time? Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the entire congregation, I welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley. I'm Leslie Blackburn, your worship associate for today's service. We gather together with our doubts as well as our convictions, with our fears and our hopes, with our failures and our aspirations, with our sorrows and our joys. Whether you're joining us today for the first time or you've been a member or friend for many years, we are glad you are here. Whatever faiths you have known, if any, whatever your background, whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you are welcome. Now, as Reverend Julie comes forward, let us all say together from our homes the words for lighting our chalice. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, to share. And I invite you to join with me as we say our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help our neighbor. To these ends, we covenant one with another.
Please join with me now in a time of silent meditation and prayer. joining with people of goodwill throughout our nation and around the world. Our deepest hopes and prayers for healing, justice, and peace, even as we are mourning. May we find all of the compassion and courage that we need to face the coming days with hope and with a new promise for a better tomorrow.
Today's words for reflection were written by the UU minister, Kristen Grassel-Schmidt. Spirit of life beating in our hearts, coursing through our veins, inviting us to perceive those things we often find so hard to notice, the limits we don't question, the lies we accept, the dreams we abandon for the sake of the pragmatic. Spirit of life, in this time we spend together giving thanks, grieving losses, singing praises, asking why, turn our focus from yesterday to today and even tomorrow. Open our hearts to go beyond what is likely to what is possible. For in order for our dreams to become realities, we must first be able to imagine them. Amen.
Witness the mystery of His love.
I don't know about you, but I am still feeling shaken by the events of this past week. Not only that, but we're joining together in our apprehension and worry of what may come next in this tumultuous transition of national government administrations and the violent atmosphere that has emerged around it. And if that weren't enough to make our blood pressure rise and to keep us up at night, we're simultaneously feeling simply overwhelmed by the rising magnitude of suffering and uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Friends, take a deep breath with me as we acknowledge these are hard times. Not only are we as individuals, families, communities, and a nation being tested by adversity, the very foundations of our hard-won American democracy are being shaken and tested as well. Because the violent attacks of the Capitol and our elected leadership, along with soaring numbers of COVID-19 victims, could have been avoided with a different set of decisions and behaviors, I invite you to pause with me a moment to recognize these are massive failures of our own making. How will we overcome these human-made adversities without taking some responsibility for what has happened and give serious thought to what is possible next? Will we continue down these destructive paths, or can we stem the tide? What we sow, shall we reap. All of our actions and inactions have real-world consequences. When bravely acknowledging the huge failings at work in this violent political standoff taking place in the simultaneous pandemic catastrophe, we have to analyze what has taken place and to hold ourselves and each other accountable. We don't know what that might look like much of the time, and yet there is a high price to be paid in all of these instances. How do we correct these mistakes? What can we do to prevent them from ever happening again? Political disagreements will continue, and yes, there will be future viruses to face, but are we committed to handling them better than we have done in these present and continuing crises? Each of us has to choose. And while we each have to take personal responsibility, that's simply not enough given the circumstances. We must join with other people of goodwill to address these deep-seated problems and to overcome them with creative moral response and with creative and moral initiative of action. These are huge problems, and we each have to do our part. At the same time, as part of a community of Unitarian Universalists, we do not have to struggle through these tragically difficult times alone. Please reach out to one another. There are so many ways to do it, even though we are physically separated during the pandemic quarantine. This next week, we'll be launching our new buddy system at church to help us through the next 6 months. But you don't have to be participating in that program to do the following simple things. When you are feeling strong and centered, reach out and check in with others in your circle to see how they are doing. If they need help with anything, just show up from a physical distance, of course, to show that you care and to provide a listening and supportive presence. The fact is, we are all struggling right now with all that is going on. And here's the second simple thing to do, but a little bit harder for many of us than reaching out to check on others. When you are not feeling strong and centered, please reach out to others and let them know you could really use a little support to help get you through. We don't need to be stoic individualists who try to pretend that we're doing just fine when we're actually not. We need each other now more than ever to get through these trying times. We have to take care of ourselves and each other if we are to have the strength and commitment needed to overcome these present adversities and to build a better way for those who come after us so these failures are not repeated. With that said, I'm going to do something I rarely do in the pulpit today. Over the last 20 years of my ministry, there has been only a handful of times when, as a part of my Sunday message, I chose to read an official statement from our denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association. As Unitarian Universalists who support the Unitarian Universalist Association, shortened to the UUA, we are technically not a denomination, but rather a free association of congregations who are in mutual covenant. So the statement is not an official position that is designed to specify a religious party line, but rather a thoughtful articulation of public witness based in our Unitarian Universalist faith, principles, and core values. I want to share with you the UUA statement that was released on Friday, January 8th, but after that, I also want to share the statement published the day before on Thursday, January 7th by our historical Congregationalist cousins, the United Church of Christ, also known as UCC for short, with whom we have had a long history of collaboration. The heading for the UUA statement reads, Unitarian Universalists denounce complicity with extremists, call for courageous action by national leaders. And the text of the statement is as follows. The Unitarian Universalist Association joins leaders across this country in calling for the immediate removal of Donald Trump as the US president. We call on the Vice President and every cabinet member to invoke the 25th Amendment and that Congress pursue articles of impeachment for the protection, safety, and stability of our country. President Trump has violated his oath to defend the Constitution, engaged in illegal and seditious acts, undermined a peaceful transition of power, and put the country, its leaders, and people in danger. As a religious institution, we live faithfully our role as part of the critical fabric of our country's moral conscience. And as Unitarian Universalists, we hold democracy as a central principle of our faith. We are compelled by the events of this week to call these actions what they were: attempts by insurrection to overthrow our duly elected government. This is a time for true accountability and courageous action in pursuit of a more just, equitable, multiracial, and pluralistic democracy. President Trump and other national leaders, including members of Congress, must be held accountable for inciting insurrectionist violence by spreading lies and false claims of election fraud and attempting to usurp the will of the American people. We condemn these treasonous attempts to subvert our democracy and prevent certification of the Electoral College vote. The inevitable result was the unlawful storming of the US Capitol, the endangerment of congressional leaders, staff, law enforcement, and multiple deaths. We call on every member of Congress to act on their sworn constitutional allegiance and tell the American people the truth, that the presidential election represented a free and fair election. Despite Donald Trump's attempts to dress up false claims of fraud and a spurious legal cloak, the 2020 election was the largest and most transparent election in history. The outcome of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president of the United States represents the will of the American people. The events witnessed at the Capitol are a predictable outcome of the racism and white supremacy that has been emboldened and given license by the president throughout his term and without consequence. We call on our government to take this attack on our democracy seriously. White supremacist violence is the greatest threat to public safety and our democracy. From the daily news to the warnings of federal intelligence experts, we know that the greatest ongoing domestic threats are from these extremists. The president and his enablers sought to undermine the 2020 election and focused their efforts to delegitimize and throw out votes of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people across the country, especially in contested states. These efforts were a targeted attack rooted in our country's long practice of voter suppression and denying citizenship rights to people of color. An attack on the voting rights and citizenship rights of any citizen is an attack on the rights of every citizen. Black movement leaders have been warning us for years that this is the frightening impact of white supremacy culture, which was evident in our founding documents and throughout our country's history. It was on clear display in the stark contrast of law enforcement's minimal response to the white supremacist insurrectionists that breached the Capitol. Protests by the Movement for Black Lives, by comparison, were met with tanks, tear gas, and bullets. From Charlottesville to Kenosha, Minneapolis to Michigan, we have seen this pattern repeated. The disparity of police treatment is yet another example of the fundamental need to divest from a punitive and racist system of policing and the need to invest instead in the health and well-being of our communities and civic life. The response to this attempted coup should not be more policing. The failure is not a lack of policing, but a pattern of complicity with these dangerous extremists. We must uphold our democratic values and lawful civic engagement, even at the most difficult times. It is the measure of our national character. We must use this moment as an opportunity for profound reflection and awakening, not just in a momentary outcry, but as a basis for significant and lasting change. The UUA statement closes by saying, our Unitarian Universalist tradition is rooted in the values of human dignity, justice, compassion, and democratic principles. We will remain vigilant in our commitment to protecting our democracy and the integrity of its principles and the rights of all its people. And now, for the statement by the United Church of Christ from Thursday, January 7th, that I have only slightly abbreviated. Their headline reads, UCC national leaders condemn insurrection in racist takeover of the US Capitol. We, the called and elected leaders of the United Church of Christ, heirs of a tradition, rise in one voice with clarity and unity to condemn the insurrection that took place at the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. In the spirit of our ancestors, recognizing their intent and standing on their shoulders as people who acted in courage and faith, we join in one voice to name the evil we witnessed and to condemn the words of our president and the actions of his insurrectionists and white supremacist terrorists. The president's words incited the attack on the United States Capitol. Therefore, we call upon members of his administration and the Congress to remove him from office, thereby holding him accountable for his treasonous actions and ensuring that he never hold the office of the President of the United States again. We bear witness to and name as racist the deplorable difference between security plans implemented during Black Lives Matter protests and the security plans ordered and implemented on January 6th, ahead of a rally by armed domestic terrorists, and call out that difference as an embodiment of white supremacy. That difference allowed the acts of terrorism to happen. We hold accountable our elected leaders who have been complicit by their support of the actions of the president as well as the lingering silence in the wake of his actions. We condemn their unwillingness to uphold the Constitution of the United States and their fueling of the flames that erupted at the US Capitol and on the streets of Washington, D.C. We name the pain and the collective trauma that all Americans felt when we were forced to witness the terror inflicted by armed insurrectionists. The mob broke through windows and forced our elected representatives to hide under their desks, place gas masks on their faces, lie under the rows of seats in the House and Senate chambers. The mob surrounded US Capitol security guards who were outnumbered and overwhelmed and made them fear for their lives. They marched through the Capitol building carrying Confederate flags. They placed pipe bombs and Molotov cocktails on the grounds of the Capitol. They ransacked the offices of our elected representatives and vandalized the grounds and the building. They removed the American flag that flies over the US Capitol and replaced it with a Trump flag. They desecrated the halls of Congress and our nation's democracy. To the extent possible, every person involved in this armed attack on our Capitol must be identified, arrested, and placed on trial for crimes committed. The UCC statement goes on to say, our love affair with white skin in America, a love affair that seeps into every pore of America's skin, including our houses of worship, culminated in another indefensible act of raw terror and violence. Some rioters and insurrectionists, many of whom would proclaim Jesus as their Lord and Savior, were carrying Bibles or holding Jesus Saves signs. We want to be clear. There is nothing Christ-like in any of this. Christians have for too long tolerated racism and racists as part of our collective history. Today, as we condemn the perpetrators of this violence on the grounds of our Capitol, we further condemn the lie that whiteness is a virtue. The love of whiteness is an evil that must be rooted out from our shared and common narrative, and until it is, white supremacists like our current president and his devoted followers will continue to behave like they have a God-given right to acts of violence and insurrection. We condemn the inaction and complicity of the church, which continues to miss the mark of its high calling by using the Bible and the gospel narratives to support injustice. The time has come, indeed, it is long overdue, for the church to denounce theologies of whiteness and to name white supremacy as idolatrous. Now is the time for the church in all denominational contexts to release support of white power and white privilege and to embrace fully the call to follow Jesus and his ways. Our faith calls us to acts of love, kindness, and compassion. Our faith reminds us that the power of God aligns with the poor and the abandoned, the weak and the hungry, the oppressed and the marginalized. We call on all people of faith and goodwill to use what we saw on January 6, 2021, as a call to justice and a reminder of what happens when evil goes unchallenged. Our faithful response to this most recent act of white terrorism and insurrection will be to feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, free the oppressed, welcome the stranger, love the neighbor, and fill the whole world with the love of our blessed Redeemer, Jesus. And as we continue to do so, we will walk in the courage to denounce and dismantle theologies and systems of oppression and hatred, and replace them with theologies of freedom, peace, justice, and love. We invite all members of the United Church of Christ to a period of sober reflection and fervent prayer. We further urge brave conversation and a willingness to break down the barriers between us and within our communities. In the words of the prophet Micah, let us go forth to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. As I share the last sentence in the statement published by the United Church of Christ, I invite us as Unitarian Universalists to join our faith with theirs during this tumultuous time. The last sentence reads, "May we as a church offer a clear witness of bold love, honest confession, and simple humility required of us all in this moment. May it be so."
As Reverend Julie extinguishes the flame, let us say together from our homes the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of our community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather to grow more generous in spirit and in action. We hope you will consider making an offering after today's service through our webpage, UUShenandoah.org, which allows us to exercise the generosity of spirit for this self-supporting church and its many ministries, which continue while we're not able to be physically together. And we invite you to join our church community at noon at our virtual post-service gathering for joys and concerns, followed by our coffee hour conversations and smaller breakout groups. The Zoom link is found in your UUCSV email. Thank you for joining us today.
Our closing words are adapted from the writing of Kathleen McTeague. Let us remember in this new year that whatever justice, whatever peace and wholeness might bloom in our world this year, we are the hearts and minds, hands and feet, the embodiment of all the best visions of our people. The new year can be new ground for the seeds of our dreams and highest aspirations. Let us take the step forward together onto new ground.